The lights in an old movie theater always fall the same way, soft, golden, a little faded, like they're trying to hold on to a memory. And somewhere in that glow, a film like The Last Dragon still lives. You may remember the first time you saw it, the music, the colors, the swagger of Harlem mixed with the innocence of a young hero searching for his glow. But here's the part most people never heard. Years later, RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan stood in a studio holding a script for a remake. He imagined Rihanna stepping into the spotlight as Laura Charles, and Chris Brown, troubled, talented, complicated, trying to earn redemption as Bruce Leroy. Even Samuel L. Jackson was lined up to bring a new kind of ShoNuff to life. It was bold, risky, maybe even necessary. Yet Hollywood dreams don't always cross the finish line. Berry Gordy, the man who created the original magic, looked at the script and quietly said, "Not yet." And that's where our story begins, not with the film itself, but with the lives behind it. Lives full of talent, hope, and shadows that the cameras never captured. Vanity, Julius Carry, Leo O'Brien. The road to The Last Dragon didn't begin on a movie set. It began in 3 different corners of America, carried by 3 young souls who had no idea their lives would one day meet under Motown's bright lights. For Vanity, the journey started long before she stepped onto a stage. She moved through the world with a softness that hid the storms inside her. People remembered the first time they saw her, not just because she was beautiful, but because she carried that kind of light you don't forget. By the time Berry Gordy began searching for the woman who would play Laura Charles, Vanity had already lived a life that felt bigger than her age. And when Timok was asked which woman he could imagine falling in love with on screen, he didn't hesitate. He said her name. Sometimes destiny doesn't shout, sometimes it just slips into the room quietly and sits down. Vanity didn't chase the role. The role found her. Across the country, another story was forming in the hallways of a Chicago high school. Julius Carry wasn't the loudest kid, but when the curtain opened, something inside him did too. The Spartan Players, the school's theater troupe, became the first place where he learned the weight of a spotlight, the discipline of story, the joy of applause. Plays like Hamlet and West Side Story gave him a language to express himself, and audiences watched a tall, sharp-featured young man who could shift from comedy to tragedy in the space of a breath. His family saw the danger of the streets rising around him and made a hard choice. They moved him to Los Angeles. There, he studied film and television with the seriousness of someone who believed art could change a life. He earned a bachelor's degree. Then a master's. Julius didn't stumble into acting, he built his craft brick by brick. And when he finally stepped onto a set, Disco Godfather, his first real film, people noticed the presence, the height, the charisma that would one day turn into ShoNuff, the Shogun of Harlem. And then there was Leo. Harlem doesn't just raise children, it shapes them. Leo O'Brien grew up in the echo of drum machines, double Dutch ropes hitting concrete, and the early heartbeat of hip-hop. His big brother, Master G of the Sugar Hill Gang, was already part of music history. That meant Leo grew up watching possibility walk in and out of their home like an old friend. He learned rhythm before he learned responsibility. The streets were his first stage. At a young age, he found himself in places most kids only dreamed of, rapping in commercials, appearing on national news segments, sitting on car hoods trading verses with neighborhood friends. When Hollywood came knocking, he didn't shrink back. He auditioned 5 times for The Last Dragon. 5 times. Each time, he came back sharper, hungrier, more certain. Out of more than 2,500 hopefuls, Leo won the role of Richie Green, the kid brother with the smile that could brighten a room. Motown executives liked him. Berry Gordy liked him. Some said he treated Leo like family. For a boy from Harlem, that meant everything. What tied these 3 lives together wasn't fame, at least not yet. It was the feeling that they each carried something inside them waiting to be seen. Vanity moved through life like music. Julius stood like a pillar. Leo burst forward like a spark. None of them knew that the film they were about to join would follow them for the rest of their lives. But before they became the faces we remember, before their lines were quoted or their scenes replayed, they were simply 3 young artists trying to find their place in a world that didn't always make space for them. Their early years were shaped by hope, by struggle, by small rooms filled with big dreams. And in those dreams, you can already feel the pulse of what The Last Dragon would become, a film made of talent that had been carried, polished, and shaped long before any camera rolled. There is a moment in every artist's life when the world finally turns its head and takes notice. For Vanity, Julius Carry, and Leo O'Brien, that moment arrived the day The Last Dragon burst onto American screens. It wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural shift wrapped in glow, music, and motion. And for these 3, it became the brightest chapter of their lives. For Vanity, fame moved toward her the way light moves toward a mirror, naturally, almost inevitably. When she walked onto the set as Laura Charles, she carried the kind of confidence you can't fake. Her presence softened the sharp edges of the story. She was elegance wrapped in neon. Her voice, her glance, her rhythm, they made the film feel like something more than action. They made it feel alive. People didn't just watch her, they followed her. MTV viewers, Motown fans, young girls who had never seen someone who looked like her stand in the center of her own world. Laura Charles became an icon not because she tried to be, but because Vanity simply was. Then came ShoNuff. There are villains, and then there are characters who burn themselves into memory. Julius Carry didn't walk into the role of the Shogun of Harlem, he ignited it. His height, his booming voice, the wild armor, the shades, the grin that curled just enough to keep you guessing, he made ShoNuff a legend. What few people knew was how far Julius went to make sure the character felt real. He stayed in costume between takes. He challenged people on set, in character, pushing tension into the air so the camera would feel the electricity the audience later felt in theaters. His background in theater, his deep training, his discipline, they were the bones behind ShoNuff's swagger. Kids in the 80s didn't dress up as villains often, but when they did, they dressed like him. ShoNuff posters on bedroom walls, Halloween costumes, parody sketches decades later, his influence stretched far beyond what the production budget ever imagined. Julius Carry didn't just play a role. He carved out a piece of American pop culture. And then there was Richie. Leo O'Brien, with that unmistakable Harlem energy, slid into his role like he had been born for it. Richie Green wasn't the hero, but he was the heartbeat, the reminder that stories about strength are also stories about family. His humor, his timing, the way he looked at his older brother with a mix of pride and playful judgment, it made audiences lean in. And because Leo brought pieces of his real-life rhythm into the role, Richie felt authentic in a way only a kid raised in the birthplace of hip-hop could deliver. Leo's scenes didn't need special effects. His charisma was enough. After the film came out, kids recognized him on the street. Teenagers tried to talk like him. Even Berry Gordy felt something for him beyond business. He invited Leo into his home, treated him like a son. For a boy from Harlem, that kind of acceptance felt like stepping into another universe. Together, the cast created something Hollywood wasn't expecting. The Last Dragon wasn't designed to become a blockbuster. It wasn't meant to be the voice of a generation. But it became both, because it arrived at a moment when young black audiences were hungry to see themselves as heroes, lovers, comedians, fighters, whole people living in full color. And Motown understood exactly what it was doing. With Berry Gordy at the helm, the film wasn't just entertainment, it was a showcase of black creativity in all its forms: music, fashion, movement. The soundtrack pulsed with the rhythm of the era. The neon glow of Harlem night scenes captured a world that felt rough yet full of hope. And for so many young viewers, seeing a black martial arts hero wasn't just refreshing, it was revolutionary. Vanity's rise was immediate. Julius Carry's villain became a touchstone. Leo O'Brien was embraced as the little brother everyone wished they had. They each became part of the film's mythology, woven into the fabric of a moment that still echoes today. Because The Last Dragon, for all its bright colors and humor, did something powerful. It showed that black stories could be magical without losing their truth, joyful without losing their depth, and unforgettable without needing permission. For Vanity, for Julius, for Leo, this was the peak. The moment when everything they carried from childhood, from struggle, from hope, aligned with the light of the camera and gave them a place in American memory. And for the audience, their glow has never dimmed. Every life that rises eventually meets a turning point. For the stars of The Last Dragon, success didn't shield them from the weight of their own battles. Behind the glow, behind the applause, each one carried a private storm, one that fame could never quiet. For Vanity, the spotlight was both a blessing and a burden. She had walked into Hollywood with the confidence of someone who had already endured more than most people knew. Yet the world she stepped into demanded more than talent, it demanded pieces of her soul. The music, the cameras, the late nights, the pressure to be perfect, to be desired, to be strong, it all blended into a rhythm that was impossible to keep up with. People saw the beauty, the charm, the smile. What they didn't see was the loneliness that often comes with being a symbol. She tried to rise above it, to reinvent herself, to rewrite her story. But the cost of the climb had already taken something from her that she would spend years trying to reclaim. Her journey became a reminder that even the brightest lights can cast the longest shadows. Julius Carry's turning point arrived in a quieter, more devastating way. He had built a career on discipline and force of presence, the kind that made audiences lean forward the moment he appeared on screen. But inside his own body, another battle had begun, one he couldn't fight with skill or training. When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, the news fell like a heavy curtain. Friends described him as calm, steady, still committed to his craft even as his strength faded. For a man who spent his life transforming into larger-than-life characters, the illness must have felt like a thief gradually dimming his flame. Yet Julius continued working, continued giving, continued showing the world a dignity that illness could not erase. When he passed in 2008 at just 56 years old, fans mourned the loss of ShoNuff. But those who knew him mourned something deeper, the loss of a gentle, thoughtful man who carried his role not as a mask, but as an act of devotion. And then there was Leo O'Brien, whose fall from the heights was the hardest to watch because it began so early and moved so fast. After The Last Dragon, he stepped into adolescence with fame on his shoulders and confusion in his heart. Hollywood can be unforgiving to a child who shines too soon. Opportunities faded. Pressure grew. The world around him, Harlem's noise, the temptations, the chaos, pulled at him until he lost the balance he once had. As years passed, Leo drifted farther from the bright-eyed boy audiences remembered. Trouble followed him, or maybe he followed trouble, assault charges, robbery, drug-related arrests. 8 years behind bars left marks that no screen could hide. And yet, even after his release, he tried. He opened a small studio. He worked in his community. He looked for a second chance the way a man searches for sunlight after too many years underground. But destiny wasn't done testing him. In 2011, during a simple argument with a friend over something as small as a chair, the situation turned violent. Leo was shot 3 times, twice in the abdomen, once in the arm. Doctors were stunned that he survived. He told people he healed fast. He said his body was built to endure. But some wounds don't show their danger right away. A year later, he began complaining that his insides hurt, that his hand would go numb, that something felt wrong. Quiet symptoms. Whispered warnings. And then one night, alone and exhausted, his body gave out. Later, his nephew revealed the truth: the surgeons had stitched him incorrectly after the shooting. Internal damage had been hiding beneath the surface, slowly shutting him down. Leo died in his sleep at just 41 years old. 3 stars. 3 journeys that began with hope. And yet each one carried a different kind of heartbreak. Vanity fought to reclaim herself from a world that consumed her faster than she could grow. Julius Carry fought a silent illness with grace that few ever witnessed. Leo O'Brien fought the streets, his past, and the wounds that ultimately stole his life. Their stories are not tragedies for the sake of sorrow. They are reminders, gentle but unflinching, that behind every performance we love stands a human being, fragile and complex, trying to navigate a world that doesn't always offer mercy. And perhaps that is why The Last Dragon still speaks to people after all these years. Not because the film is perfect, but because the people in it were real, glowing, flawed, hopeful, and unforgettable. Across America, The Last Dragon became more than a film, it became a memory shared across generations. For many black families, it was the first time they saw a hero who looked like them step into a world of color, music, and martial arts without apology. The movie carried a confidence that matched the pulse of 1980s America, when culture, identity, and art were all shifting at once. And audiences felt it. Not because the film was perfect, but because it was proudly, unapologetically its own thing. In living rooms from Detroit to Oakland, people watched it on VHS, quoting lines, humming the soundtrack, laughing at Richie's timing, or cheering when Bruce Leroy finally found his glow. It became a Saturday night ritual, a film parents showed their children to pass down a piece of who they were. For many, It wasn't just entertainment, it was representation at a time when that word wasn't yet part of national conversation. But its influence didn't end in America. Overseas, especially in Europe and parts of Asia, The Last Dragon arrived like a cultural spark. Viewers were fascinated by its blend of Black American style and Eastern martial arts philosophy, a mix that felt fresh and unpredictable. Even decades later, filmmakers, musicians, and choreographers cite it as a quiet influence on the way they think about merging genres and cultures. RZA's dream of a remake, one bold enough to cast Rihanna and Chris Brown, proved how deep that influence ran. The very idea of revisiting the story showed that the film had never really left the public imagination. It remained a touchstone, a symbol of creativity that felt both nostalgic and timeless. And yet, the world also recognized the humanity behind it. When news spread of Julius Carry's passing, fans mourned not just a character, but a man who shaped their childhoods. When stories surfaced about Leo O'Brien's struggles, people were reminded that fame does not always protect those who shine early. Their lives stirred conversations about resilience, opportunity, and the fragile line between success and survival. In America and beyond, The Last Dragon is remembered with warmth, an imperfect, beautiful relic of a time when art dared to be joyful. And the people behind it remain a reminder that every cultural moment carries human stories inside it, full of hope, complexity, and meaning. Some stories fade when the credits roll. The Last Dragon never did. It stayed alive in the hearts of people who grew up watching it, quoting it, dancing to it, and believing, even if just for a moment, that anyone could find their glow if they were brave enough to look for it. What keeps the film breathing after all these years isn't just the colors or the fight scenes or the music, it's the people behind it. Vanity, with her soft radiance that could light up a room. Julius Carry, whose energy turned a villain into a legend. Leo O'Brien, whose smile still feels like a memory from a simpler time. They stepped into a world that asked everything of them, and they gave us performances that still warm the spirit decades later. Their stories remind us that success is never the whole picture. Behind every frame lies a real life, full of hope and heartbreak, full of dreams that soared and dreams that slipped away. And yet, even in their struggles, they left something meaningful behind. Something that outlived them. Today, The Last Dragon stands as a piece of American culture, bold, joyful, imperfect, and beautiful. It represents a time when Black creativity pushed through every barrier and found its place on screen with pride. It is a reminder of the power of imagination, the resilience of artists, and the way a simple story can grow into a legacy. If you've watched the film before, maybe this is a moment to watch it again, with older eyes, softer eyes, knowing what you now know about the lives behind the glow. And if these stories brought back memories, or connected you to a moment in your past, feel free to share them. Someone out there might need to hear them. Until next time, keep their story alive. And keep the glow alive in your own way, too.